are never truly lost. Well, okay, sure. Maybe we get turned around for a few days in the woods, where life just feels like it's getting the best of us and everything's going wrong. And I'm Mike Martin, and I've stood right where you're standing, lost, beaten down, like nothing's ever gonna change. And that's why I built this camp. And that's why I'm inviting you to join me and all the members of this wild community. Because you know what, friend? It does get better. So come along with me into the wild and let me show you this awesome, unique skill set that lays within inside of you. With help from the land, we're gonna unlock the steward that's inside each and every one of us that will lead the way out of the darkness and into healing. Here at the Camp of Healing on Project Mindfully Outdoors.
So what really caught my interest when you reached out was the fact that you're a designer.
Yeah.
And you took that idea of designing and applied it to, mental health and the idea of painting a picture of your life to be joyful and, really the best that it can be.
Yeah. Because I say this so often, Mike, is that design applies to every aspect of our lives. Design is a function of intention. So really, when we take the understanding that when we apply intention to anything, we are designing it, right? And what more should we be applying that to than to our own lives? Right? Because this is the only one we know that we have, that we're sure that we have, right?
Most
We can posture and suppose that we might have other lives. I'm still kind of working through what does that look like? What are my beliefs around those things? But the reality is it doesn't matter what I believe. I don't know for sure, right? All I know is I have this life. And so leaning into being clear on the story I want my life to tell just kind of grew out of that. And I just worked with my clients in that way. And then my clients started describing me to people in their life as their interior designer and their life coach. And I was like, you do? And I was like, oh, okay. So, and then I did 2.5 years of group coaching around these subjects. And I realized that it was much more powerful than calling myself just an interior designer. And really, my purpose had I had found my purpose in a much larger thing.
See, I love that because that's how this whole project has come together. It started out more of an outlet for myself. People caught on to it, and it's kind of led to where it's at now, which still has a lot to do with the ideas that I come up with. And
yeah,
I feel like that idea of designing or painting a picture of your life is one that I know I overlooked for a long time. It was kind of like I just live in survival mode. I take what comes my way. And recently I came across the book that was called The Medicine Bag. And it really started it talks a lot about that idea of the fact that we're all artists inside. We're all painting this picture of what we live. And to me, I found that to be really intriguing because everything that has helped me come, I guess full circle into where I'm at now is from things that I done in the outdoors. And it was things that I always did, but I never stopped and took the perspective of, these things can actually help you grow and paint that picture.
Yeah. I love to remind myself and the people that I work with, our life is not about these major decisions. Our life is not a bunch of crossroads. Our life is 100 different small decisions that we make every single day stacked on top of each other. And when we recognize the power of those decisions and how they work together and how the ripple effect of those decisions don't just affect us, but everyone around us, we start to understand how powerful we are. And much of the system that we live in wants us to deny that power, because if we understood that power, we would change everything. Right?
No, it's very true. I mean,
we would change everything, and we would change everything. I don't even know how to say it any better than that. We are all connected. We are all energy. Everything, every physical thing, we're all made of energy. Physics tells us that, right? And so when we understand the ripple effect of our energy in everything around us, and that we are truly connected to one another, when we own that power, we recognize how much we need to push away in our world, because our world is, especially here in America, we're constantly being bombarded by information that's supposed to distract us from our power, right? Because if we are so focused on trying to compete and consume and all of these things, we can't possibly sit inside of our own body, be present inside of our own skin. And when we are connected to ourselves authentically, and then we can connect to one another authentically, and we become truly powerful. Truly powerful.
See, I love that. And I feel like an important part of that is the fact that, the way society is written nowadays, we look strictly at the result.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's how America was founded. It's on results, really.
What did I end up naming it? Stop stepping on your own foot.
Yeah.
And there's a part in there where I talk about, being out in the field, and you've got this giant buck that walks into your scope, and you're hesitant because he's just outside your range. So it takes that snap decision of whether or not you feel the confidence to pull the trigger. And in that second, he just continues to walk on down the line. So ultimately you're staring at nothing but air through your scope because you weren't trusting in what you're doing. And I feel like when you broaden the picture and you expand your horizons, you get to that authentic sense of yourself, and then you can branch out and you build that connection with people on a real authentic level, as opposed to, we're just competing, and we're, I guess, trying to push each other forward and this and that, but there is no real there's no real connection there.
No, there's no real connection there. And I think we've forgotten what real connection feels like, or maybe we never did know what it was like, right? Like maybe we grew up in a place where our parents never had that true understanding. And so we couldn't possibly have that understanding. Yet at the same time, I think we feel it inside of our bones. We feel it. And I think that's a lot of where we see loneliness being so pervasive right now, is because we intrinsically know that we're supposed to be connected to one another, because we are connected to one another. And yet our society has us giving one another a Heisman constantly, like, this is my space, this is you, and planting our flag, and not recognizing that in fact we're meant to coexist. We're meant to orbit around one another, to move in each other's space, but to respect each other's space. And it's this beautiful, delicate dance that is supposed to happen, but we're ignoring the dance, right? Like we're ignoring all of the ways that we move, these ecosystems in which we all move and operate. They're all interrupted. They're like arrested. And getting back to a place where we can feel ourselves so that we can feel and connect to one another is vitally important. Vitally important, because we're watching our society literally crumble around us for so many reasons.
Well, see, I totally agree about the importance of it, and I kind of spin back a little bit, along my path, is a lot of that ends up being rooted in fear.
Of course. Yes.
It's that concept that I'm scared of what I don't know.
Yeah.
Because those things were kind of built around the cycles that I learned growing up.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's what I was trained to do. There was no thought process or anything involved in it. It's just you kick on autopilot. You don't have to deal with it.
It's programming.
Yes. And a lot of us, I feel, are afraid to actually step in and deal with ourselves.
Yeah. I mean, there's a reason, right? Like that fear is programmed into us, fear of ourselves, fear of one another. And it just keeps building, it just keeps building on itself. It metastasizes and gets uglier and uglier. And instead of being willing to listen to one another and get curious, we're taught little sayings that seem harmless when we're kids, that curiosity killed the cat, right? Like even these little sayings, they feel like they must be harmless, but they're not. They're not harmless. They keep telling us not to be authentic, not to stay curious, not to listen to one another, that we have to know, that knowing is our currency, right? Like being all knowing is our currency, but we're neglecting the actual knowing, which is our deeper wisdom that tells us we don't have to know everything. As a matter of fact, we need one another. We desperately need one another, and we're existing to complement one another and to work with one another. But curiosity is a key ingredient. And wrapped up in curiosity is vulnerability, is authenticity, is playfulness, is exploration, is all of these beautiful things wrapped up in just one way of experiencing the world, just being curious.
No, most definitely. And I love the choosing words in there about not having to know everything.
Yeah.
I think those were some of the most powerful words that were ever spoken to me, kind of out of the blue. And I really gravitated toward it and thought about, in real life, it was always, I kind of know everything. Everything's got to be under my thumb.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially because you were raised as a man.
Right. And then when I go out into the wilderness to hunt, fish, or whatever the adventure is, I don't know what's coming.
Right.
But I adapt to it and I'm okay.
Yeah. Exactly.
And it took a lot of work. It took a lot of time to be able to transition and bring that into everyday life.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's hard work. Like, I mean, obviously I wasn't raised as a man, so I don't have an understanding of that lived experience. But I do recognize from being someone who has interacted with men my whole life that there is so much societal pressure to know, to be the knowing, or to pretend like or to cover it up with bravado. And I really just appreciate your willingness to be like, I don't know. Like that's such a beautiful place, especially in our society, for a man to be able to get to and say, I don't know, and to be willing to learn. Like that is such a beautiful place, and such a scary place, because bravado is so elevated in our society.
No,
ego. Yeah.
It's a scary place for sure.
Yeah.
But as I've found along the way, it's actually a lot of fun.
Exactly. But it also is key to surround yourself with the people who support you in that journey, right? Like to find the people who support you in deconstructing the ideas around what is it to be a man.
Yeah. And, as much fun as it is, and at times there's even a reassurance in that. It's kind of like, hey, I don't have to have the outcome.
Exactly.
It pulls me back into the moment.
Yeah.
And, the way I tie the outdoor skills and all that stuff together,
yeah,
it gives you that flexibility to be able to adapt and overcome.
Yeah. And to seek other people's wisdom in your life and to be like, actually, I think you have some knowledge here in this area or some wisdom in this area that I don't have, and to be able to tap into the people around you and know that you don't have to be in the lead all the time. You don't have to know all the answers. You don't have to be in the lead. It's like birds flying, right? Like there's a leader and for a certain period of time, and then that leader falls back and someone else steps into that role, right? And then they're flying in their formation, and then that bird steps back. Each bird takes a turn being a leader, right? And I think that's such a beautiful metaphor for how we could be operating. And there's a specific term used for starlings called murmuration. And murmuration for starlings is that they move in a way that's like the ocean, and they're able to do it because each one only pays attention to the 7 birds around it. And so they move like a sculpture, and it's very unique to them. And I think if we thought about our society and the way that we are operating ourselves, if we thought about the fact that there's times for us to lead and there's times for us to, but if we were all worried, like more paying attention to those around us and taking care of those around us than necessarily needing to be the leader of the pack, right? Then we could really flow together in a beautiful way, where we could learn and grow together rather than needing to be the one at the top and that being a lonely place. No one has to be there lonely. We could be in a community together, doing this together.
No, that's beautifully said. I love the metaphor that you used for it as well. I mean, that's, you know, kind of the thing that we all look for when we're out in the goose duck fields, and to us that's an amazing thing. It's, you know, very surreal, but it's also one of those things you can look at and you can really learn from. Because to tie onto that, if you look at like goose behavior, you know, when they're making their migration, it's about the flock. It's not the individual itself. You know, if a member of the flock goes down, a couple of them stay with them, and they stay there until either they help them bring back the health so they can continue to fly, or, you know, they inevitably perish.
Yeah,
They can carry on. And deep rooted inside of us is that same concept, but when you get so caught up in that black and white vocabulary, you lose sight of that. And you know, when you allow yourself that vulnerability to walk within that unknown area, that unknown field, you bring a much broader vocabulary with you. So you're able to interpret and realize, I can use my skills here to lead the way. But if it's not that, or someone else is in need, I can support them in whatever it is. And you know what, that goal that we're all setting out for, it's still going to be there. We can still jump back and reach it.
Exactly. It's not like by stepping back and helping someone else that we are knocked out of the game, right? Like that is a way of looking at the world from a very vertical perspective. And if we can, you know, work to then adjust our perspective and our view of the world as horizontal, rather than trying to clamber over top of one another, we'll recognize that we're meant to get there together. And by us peeling off and perhaps leading in a moment where someone else is weak, then we strengthen together and then we rejoin, right? We create micro community inside of macro community. We're flowing with whatever the heck comes our way, rather than thinking the goal is all I'm paying attention to. What if there is no goal? What if it's just about the journey, right? What if the goal is a lie?
See, I know for me at this stage, it is the journey. You know, the journey is the goal.
Exactly.
You know, the adventure, the growth, discovery, meeting people, the connections, all that good stuff. That's what I live to celebrate now.
Yeah.
But if you turn the clock back years ago,
oh God,
it was, you know, celebrating the nose to the grindstone, because it hit all that stuff and it made it so much easier.
Hustle culture was definitely a part of my life for a really long time, until I realized I hated it. And I started to form, as I decided that if I was going to start my own company, I was going to be really, really intentional about how I was going to do it from the very beginning. And I decided I started leaning into, what does it mean to build an empire? What does that even mean? Because you hear so many people say, I'm building an empire. I don't have time. I'm building an empire. And I'm like, but hold up. The history of empires are that they're built on the backs of people. They're built on systems of oppression. They're built on exploitation. And when I first started my company, someone was like, yeah, why don't you just get interns? Like, we built our company on the backs of interns. And I was like, did you just hear what you said out loud? You built your business on the back of unpaid labor. How is that okay? And how has that been normalized, right? That you're, not only did you do it, but you're telling me I should do it. And I made a decision right then and there that I'm not building an empire. I'm building a galaxy. A galaxy is a group of stars that are brought together by a gravitational pull. Right? They are naturally pulled to one another energetically. They shine bright on their own, but they shine even more beautifully and brightly together. It's something that, you know, we see constellations in these groups of art. There's millions of stars and billions of stars in the sky, and we see them individually, but we also see the pictures that they form in these micro communities that we call constellations, right? So we start to think about our world that way. It starts to be a really beautiful understanding of what's possible, rather than needing power over someone. We recognize that we have all the power we need inside ourselves.
That definitely takes a lot to get to that point, though. You know what I mean?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. 100%. Yeah.
Like a lot of us are not grown and raised to have that broad palette to work with as far as the color scheme.
No, it's taken years of work on my part to get to that place. Years.
And I feel like it's the same thing with, you know, kind of, it all comes in leaps and bounds, and, you know, there's a lot of growing and pulling of teeth along the way.
Yes.
But when you get to that point, you know, yeah, we've all got to make a living. And you're doing it in a way that is not only providing those means, but it's also providing self-satisfaction.
Yeah.
It's empowering and it's uplifting other people that are involved in what it is that you have going on.
Yeah.
And it's also leaving kind of a legacy that you're building.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I finally got to the place, and I was watching something the other day, and somebody put it so simply and so beautifully, and I identified immediately with it. They were like, you know, human beings are the only beings on this planet that have to pay to live here.
I like that.
And I was like, oh, that hits hard, so hard, because I think we've gotten to this place politically where so many people are like, no, you've got to earn your place. You've got to do all these things. But there are basic human rights, and we're not meeting each other's basic human rights because we have bought into a system that tells us that people don't deserve basic human rights, that we have to pay to live here, except we were brought here without our permission. I know my parents didn't ask my permission before I was brought here.
Right. And see, that brings up interesting points, because, you know, we are here.
We are here.
We are kind of taking over from whatever cycles and learning processes that came before us.
Exactly.
So this is kind of like one of those conversations where we're touching on those broken cycles.
Yeah.
And exploring how it benefited us to break those cycles.
Yeah. We can't, I mean, ultimately, yeah, breaking those cycles is a really scary thing. Just like when you were talking about earlier, leaning into and getting to the place where you were allowing yourself to be like, I don't know. As a society, I think so many people are coming to the place where they recognize we don't know. This is broken and we don't know. We've got to start listening to each other because we don't know. We literally don't know. We only understand from the perspective that we have been specifically taught from, which for most of us is propaganda. And the society that we have built has been built the decimation of others. And when we recognize that and we can sit with it, we don't know. We don't know. If we knew how to do better, we'd be doing better.
Well, that's where,
You know?
to me, that's where the conservation really ties in, because
Yeah,
if you look at what conservation is as far as the land and stewardship goes,
yeah,
there was all kinds of mistakes that have been made to the
yeah,
environment,
yeah,
and now we're trying to figure out to not only maintain but
yeah,
repair and rebuild those things.
yeah,
And
yeah.
I feel like that's internally that's what we're doing, because
Exactly. It's
as you
exactly.
right as you walk through life, you've been taught and brought up a certain way.
Yeah.
Inevitably, those things that you were taught nowadays are pretty well maladaptive, so they teach you to instantly make some mistakes,
100%.
and you have to go back, you have to correct some of those mistakes,
Yeah.
and there's a learning curve in there. There's a learning process. That's
It's
where you get
messy.
this. It's always going to be messy.
Messy. Yeah. Being human is messy, period. Messy. And if we're, I mean, I came to the place where I realized if our life is too clean, something's not right.
But now, see, there's another interesting point, because there are, perfectionism is one of those like key things that a lot
Yeah.
of people
Yes.
kind of pull toward them as like a safety net.
Mm-hmm.
So that
Yeah.
that messy construction site kind of feel that is the reality of life, to them is the most horrible feeling to ever walk into, let alone trying to explore this concept of I just don't know, you know.
Yeah.
And I think being able to build some kind of little staircase
Yeah.
to, I don't know, alleviate the pressures that
Yeah.
come with not being in control of
Yeah.
the answer, the outcome, and just letting the story play out
Yeah. And that's where I
is a
think
very powerful tool.
yeah. And I think that's where community comes in, is truly understanding our connection to one another and truly connecting to one another and understanding that we need each other. And that's the way it's supposed to be. Because we can't change anything if we don't recognize that we need each other. Right. And start listening to each other and listening to each other's lived experience, and not just listening, but believing each other's lived experience. And then recognizing that there's something to be learned from the past, and also understanding that there's no such thing as perfection. There's no such thing. And then there's this like concept that's also built into our society around, American exceptionalism, like simply because we're here and American that we know best. And it's a very colonizer idea. And if we can just sit back and tap into the wisdom of the people who came before us and be willing to learn from mistakes, yeah, it's a scary place to be. But when we can do that, that's the foundation of community, is listening to one another and just being present with one another. It's there's so much that community and curiosity can solve, and that's why I do what I do, because I really want people to recognize and know the power that curiosity and intention and community is the foundation of building a healthy society. But it has to start with us. We only have control over ourselves, right? And we have to fix here. We have to heal home before we can worry about what everybody else is doing. Because if we're not healed inside here, then we're just perpetrating more. And again, not talking about perfectionism, because I believe in taking imperfect action, but we have to get to a certain place of healing and understanding and openness before we can truly connect to others and stop doing so much harm.
Well, yeah, in meditations, there's a lot of where Marcus Aurelius talks about the exact same thing. Is we have all these traumas and things that we're trying to understand and navigate through, and somebody throughout the course of the day triggers us, but instantly we want to respond and lash out, because I guess it's supposed to make us feel better.
We get defensive.
Right. But the reality of it is regardless of whatever Joe Schmo's doing over there, you can't control it. So
Right.
if he's looking for that reaction, what's the point?
Yeah.
You don't have to have an opinion about it. So if you're
And
not going
honestly,
to have
it probably has nothing, somebody else's outburst probably has nothing to do with us. I mean, 99% of the time, it has little to do with us. It has everything to do with what's going on inside that other person's head, right? Like they're having a whole conversation in their head that's not being had out loud.
right, exactly.
And that's where that outburst comes. And then we have a conversation in our heads about the outburst that this person just had. And so there's three conversations happening, one inside each person's head and the one that's happening out loud, and none of it's connected, right? And when we can get to the place where we can be having the conversation out loud, we can acknowledge the conversation happening in our head out loud and take responsibility for it. That changes things.
Yeah,
we stop getting so defensive when we start being like, hey, what I just said to myself in my head is blah, blah, blah. And I'm acknowledging it.
That's kind of the most important aspect of it is that self-talk.
Yes.
We censor what we say to other people.
Yeah.
We think about that first before it comes out most of the time.
Yeah.
But when it's internal and we know nobody else is going to hear it, we just let things go.
Yeah, we do. And it's so detrimental because usually that's what's stacking up inside our head. Like that's what's stacking up as like what we end up actually being mad about. Like we're not mad about what's actually happening out loud. We're really just mad about what's happening in our head. And it pushes us, it separates us from one another in ways that like we don't even recognize because we're just not having the conversation that really needs to be had.
Well, I feel like when you say, it all begins inside, inside of each one of us.
Yeah.
That right there is really the key component.
Yeah.
Is that dialogue that you have, that internal self-talk.
Yeah.
There's a quote from Bearhart that rings true to me all the time is never complete a negative thought. You can start it, but you never complete it because
right.
your mind, the goal of your mind is to make all these different thoughts happen.
Yeah, our brains are meaning making machines. So we're always trying to assign meaning because our brains love a story, love a clean story. It needs a beginning, a middle, and an end. And so if some part of that story is missing, it's inserting meaning, right? And
right.
when we can recognize that pattern, we can recognize, hey, actually, I don't know. And I'm going to just ask for clarification. And I'm not going to ask in a defensive way. I'm just going to ask for clarification. I'm going to get curious and I'm going to figure out what's going on. And usually when we get curious and we lean into that vulnerability in that moment, what we thought was happening wasn't happening at all. Right. But like we're so used to protecting ourselves from one another. That's our default. And when we can learn to create respectful space for ourselves and boundaries in our relationships, those walls can come down because boundaries we're learning how to have those boundaries with one another, how to enforce them, how to communicate them, and to be able to ask for what we need and get curious with what others need in our daily interactions.
Which is all quite the learning curve.
Yeah, it'll be the learning curve I'm on for the rest of my life.
Most definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, when I got started on this process of going forward, healing and everything that I've been working through, it all started by diving into philosophy. And it was more so in a motivational aspect, kind of like, hey, if they can do it, I can do it too.
Yeah.
And then it turned into that really dissecting the concept of how I perceive things.
Yeah.
And I feel like, when you get to that stage in things,
yeah,
it's challenging. It's kind of like walking into a whole new reality.
Because it is a whole new reality. Because we define our reality by our perception of reality.
Well, yes, that is definitely true.
Yeah.
And I feel like the broader the vocabulary, the more expensive or expansive that perception in that world can become. I mean,
Yeah.
reality in life is what we make of it. So
Yep.
the more, just like a painting, when you pick up a canvas, the more colors you have on your palette, the more colorful and better that painting's going to turn out.
Yeah.
And being an artist of your own life, why stunt yourself of any added color that you can
Yeah.
use to enhance something?
Exactly. Yeah. Just mixing new colors all the time.
So as we start to kind of come toward the end of our time, I got this question that I love to hit everybody with at the end when I get them all nice and warmed up.
Sure.
From your path of design, your journey, your painting of life, leave us with some words of inspiration and something thought provoking.
Yeah. I think it's really important to recognize that our surroundings are direct reflections of ourselves, right? Whether it be physically within your home, the people you surround yourself with. And when we start to recognize whether we actually are seeing ourselves and letting ourselves take up space, when we start to understand that, we start to see that perhaps some things that are in our life aren't part of our life anymore. They need to be released and let go, so that we can step into a new reality and really allow our authentic self to be reflected in our world. I think that's just something that I've had to lean into and recognize, and has been really powerful for me, is recognizing what belongs in my life and what I can just let go of.
See, I think that ties back to one of the first words that you used way back at the beginning, that word energy.
Yeah.
And that's something that I've hit the stage of my path where I'm starting to lean into understanding that, there's just this constant wave of energy, whether you see it or you don't see it, it's there.
Yeah.
And it affects each and every one of us, whether it's good energy, bad energy, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And regardless of the fact, we still have a decision.
Yeah.
Within the whole context of what energy we're going to hold on to and what we're going to release.
Yeah.
And it comes from, the conservation idea, that trial and error.
Agreed. 100%. Yes. Yeah.
It's funny because a couple weeks ago I went with my son to the Halloween store, and there was
Yay.
there was one of the displays that he was really excited about was called the Harvester of Sorrow. As we're standing there looking at it, I thought about this story that I had heard once about a bus driver who cared enough about the people on his bus to do some poetic acting, I guess you could say, and or symbolism at least. Basically telling them, hey, as you leave the bus, I'll stand here with my hand out. You can drop off whatever negative or horrible feelings that you're having right now, and I'll throw them in the river along my path.
I love that.
And for some reason, those two things really tied together with me, and it's become something I've really started to get intrigued about exploring, is that idea of just physically seeing that negative or painful energy be released.
Yeah.
In a healthy
Yeah.
kind of manner.
Yeah. And I love that the story specifically ties back to water, because as human beings, I think we're so intrinsically connected to water because we're mostly water and the earth is mostly water. And so for us to just, step into water and let it wash away that negative energy. I love that. I love that metaphor.
No, to me, it was like one of those things that it stuck with me a few years back when I heard the story. I don't think it really resonated then. And I love how when you come across things like that, they kind of plant seeds. You may not be ready for it at the time.
Right.
I'm sure somebody will listen to this and I'd be like, oh, this was kind of interesting. It was an interesting theory.
Yeah.
And they'll store it away, and then they'll have that day where it just, jumps out at them, and they're like, man, that really makes sense, and it's really
Yeah.
helping now.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Our brains are like libraries. We store little things away as factoids. And then somehow at some point we check out the book and we're like, oh, wait, this makes so much sense now.
And this is why I love engaging in conversations like this. I feel like at some point, it's going to resonate like that. Somebody's going to check the book out, and
Yeah.
they're going to make that monumental leap.
Yeah. I hope so. I hope so.
Well, as we do come to the end of this, I want to give you the opportunity to let people know what you got going on, where they can get in touch with you.
Yeah.
And
yeah, absolutely. So the best way to get a hold of me is through my website. It's www.consonate.world, and I'm sure I'll tag it in the show notes. The www part is important simply because .world is not necessarily familiar to your computer, so sometimes it thinks you're putting in some like fake email or fake web address. And if you're interested in hiring me as a speaker, or would like me to be, would like to be part of one of my workshops, I'm conducting life design workshops. I have some virtual, some live in person. There's some different offerings there, so definitely check those out on my website.
awesome. This has been a pleasure. I'm glad
Yeah.
that it ended up coming together tonight.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, I know. Yeah, thanks, Mike. I appreciate you having me.
You're most welcome. Thank you.